Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 22, and in this one I'm going to talk to a friend of mine, Doug Wittrock, who's going to talk to us a little bit about things to do with treating injuries and so on when you face violence or when this happens in training. But first of all, as always, I want to thank one of my patrons, and that is Jose Tadeo. Jose, he's one of the patrons who stepped up like right from the very first day when I started my Patreon page. He was there right away and he's been extremely supportive. So I want to thank Jose for everything that you gave as far as support goes throughout the last year and a half. Very much appreciated. And you're the man. So anybody else who wants to jump on the Patreon train that I have to offer, so you go to patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name WIMDEMEERE. As always, the link is in the show notes. And we've got a lot of content there. I think we've got over 100 and so on hours of videos, instructional stuff and so on. So welcome to join us there. But enough of that, let's talk to Doug. So I'd like to introduce everybody to Doug Wittrock. Doug, how are you doing?
I'm doing extremely well. It's a beautiful day here in Colorado.
It's an excellent day here in Belgium. We've got a heat wave. I've been melting all day long.
Our heat has finally broken a little bit. We're in the monsoon part of the summer, and it's been raining, and it's 66 degrees. That's Fahrenheit. I can't convert it in my head.
Yeah, we had 37 degrees Celsius. I'll quickly look up.
That's pretty warm.
Yeah. I don't know what that means in Fahrenheit.
That's body temperature essentially, so just under 100.
98.6.
Yeah.
So
yeah, 98.
Probably the hottest day we had all year. All right, but we're going to talk a little bit about you. So I just want you to talk a little bit about your background. You did martial arts. You've practiced martial arts. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I have practiced martial arts. I've not really been all that active in the last several years. I've just to say I was with a school, one of those kind of schools, and I got a little disillusioned and stepped away from it. Although there's a local guy here, Sam Walker.
Yep.
He teaches here in the town that I live in, and I'm definitely contemplating getting back into his style, which is Goju-Ryu. And Sam is an amazing instructor.
He is. Sam's good people.
Yes, he is, and very, very wonderful guy as well. And I really kind of have been missing that culture and that life. And so I'm definitely considering getting back into that. I've got to get into the gym again, and I've lost a bunch of weight, and I need to lose a little bit more. And so this is exciting. I just moved back to Castle Rock and feel like I'm home again. So like getting my life going again where I had it.
Yeah.
And my background is I've been a paramedic or in EMS since 1981 here in Colorado. I became a paramedic in 1983, which is a higher level of training and certification.
So could you, because we've got an international audience, could you explain the difference between EMS, paramedic, EMT, all those kinds of things?
EMS being emergency medical services, and it kind of sometimes lumps police and fire into all that. We have some fire departments in the United States that have paramedics, but not all paramedics are firefighters. Depends on the jurisdiction and so forth. But EMTB is an EMT basic, and they have it's more than an advanced first aid provider. They're basically the lowest level of certification that you can work to be on an ambulance here in the United States. And then EMTP for paramedic, which has now become NRP, National Registered Paramedic. That's become pretty much a standard in the United States. It's a national certifying organization. And some states have still retained their certification levels as well. So the DOT, Department of Transportation, I'm trying not to use too many acronyms here, is responsible for EMS paramedic standards. They have, I think I think it's, for a paramedic, I think it's sitting right around 1,000 hours of training. I could be wrong. I'd have to look that up, but I think it's right around 1,000 or 1,200 hours. Paramedic school is extremely intense. It's like drinking through a fire hose, because those 1,000 hours come in about a 6-month period.
Okay.
And it seems like you couldn't learn it, but you can. It's a real taxing, challenging, but so much fun. I mean, I look back on it now and I think, geez, that was fun. At the time, I was pulling my hair out. That's why I don't have any now. but it was very challenging, and over the years, I've been so blessed to work in so many amazing EMS agencies. The city and county of Denver, what we once called Denver General, is now Denver Health and Hospitals, but it's a premier EMS agency in this country, and the trauma center down there was recently named after a very pioneering trauma surgeon, Eugene Moore, who is still alive, so he's able to appreciate that. And an amazing trauma surgeon, and I'm very proud to have been down there early in his career. He's a phenomenal trauma surgeon and a wonderful guy as well. And I worked in that system for 7 years until I got so cooked I couldn't deal with it anymore. Stress in EMS, we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
But he's a phenomenal trauma surgeon. I did get out of EMS for a little bit, and then actually started missing it and went back. And much like the Eagles, my second career has been better and longer than the first one. A lot more varied. I got back into EMS and almost as immediately got involved in remote work, doing remote work around the world. My first job was on a ship. It was a ship contracted to the Navy, and I can't really talk about too much about what they did. It was really fascinating being at sea as a medic. I was the ship's medic. Came back to Colorado and did some EMS again, and then went back into the whole remote thing. I did some time in Afghanistan, 3 years in Afghanistan, another year in Iraq, working for a different company, which was Afghanistan. I was there in support of the LOGCAP 3 project there with the military, and then with Iraq, it was being there in support of the infrastructure rebuilding with the oil industry there. And then ended up on the maritime side of that company, where I worked on a seismic research vessel, which was oil and gas exploration. Once again, the ship's medic at sea. I did that for about 5 years. Absolutely loved being at sea. Absolutely miss being at sea. But now I'm again, the industry kind of tanked, and the job opportunities were very limited. So I was back in EMS here in Colorado in a mountain community. We have something called counties here. It was Grand County EMS. The Grand County is surrounded on 3 sides by the Continental Divide, so we had really just awful views of the mountains. I'm joking. The mountains were absolutely, I mean, we're, the spine of the United States, the highest point in the United States, and we're surrounded on 3 sides by that, and the mountains are spectacular up there. Recently changed course again, and I'm now working as an emergency department paramedic. The roles of paramedics are continually being expanded. Even now, closer to home, I did a lot of much more advanced work in my remote work, international work, but now it's starting to trickle down into the home front. I had critical care procedures and protocols up in Grand County, mainly due to the distances involved. That was the second largest county in the state, encompassing a huge geographical area. oftentimes with 2-hour response times to certain areas of the county. So we needed to have some advanced scope, and we had that up there. And now in the emergency department, I'm functioning almost like in a nursing capacity, although with the Denver Metro paramedic protocols in a slightly expanded format there. I'll be doing suturing. I can still do intubations in the emergency department. The docs don't always get a lot of experience with that because we paramedics here, at least in Colorado, are pretty good at intubating patients. So they don't always get as much experience as they like, and we're kind of there as a fallback in case they have trouble getting it. Again, I've had just tremendous fortune in getting some amazing training, and I'm just kind of feeling blessed to be working in a very supportive environment in a very good medical care corporation. It's people talk kind of poorly sometimes about large corporations, but this one is very, very patient care centered, and I like it. So,
all right, that's pretty interesting background, and obviously, you mentioned Afghanistan and Iraq, so people will obviously want to know if you can talk about this a little bit. What is daily life like when you're in a country at war as a paramedic?
Nothing at all like the movies.
We've heard this before.
What a surprise, right? There wasn't 24/7 explosions and gunfire going off. So much of the war in Afghanistan was in remote areas and where the Taliban were hiding out, and so the military was out doing all that. And I was in Kabul. I did do some work on some of they call them FOBs, forward operating bases. I was in Jalalabad for a period of time, and I got to see where the Khyber Pass was from there, and the road in front of the base was the route of the old Silk Road, and I got to stand on that. And a lot of history in that country, and it was really, really beautiful. It's a beautiful country, aside from the poverty that you see in the cities and even in the smaller towns, but the country itself is astonishingly beautiful. Just the mountains there make ours in Colorado look small.
And could you give like an idea of what like typical injuries you would treat there? Because like you said, nothing like the movies, so everybody's picturing these
Yes.
sort of soldiers and that stepped on, that got blown to bits and horrible scenes. What kind of things did you encounter there?
I did see a little bit of that. My role was there to take care of the other contractors that were there. We did not handle the military, although I did help out on a couple of occasions at the military hospital, and I did see some battle trauma. And it's even as a paramedic with the experience I had, it was very disturbing to see so many young men with feet blown off and hands injured and shot up. And but for the most part, my work there was to take care of the contractors, or we would have overwhelmed the military medical system pretty quickly because there was a lot of contractors there. I saw a lot of minor injuries. I saw a lot of respiratory infections. The air there is not real clean.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of respiratory infections and pneumonias, and I dealt with a lot of that. I did a lot of suturing when the guys weren't careful with their knives. And
Really?
So, yes, imagine that. And they weren't very sharp either. Now the whole sharp knife is safer. Well, I can vouch for that. They would cut themselves very badly with a dull knife in many cases. But
would you say that it was the same in Iraq, similar type of working environment?
Yes, it was practically the same thing there. At the time I was there, the war was quote unquote over, but yet we were still required to go from place to place with armed security and flak vests and helmets, because there was still a lot of insurgent activity happening. And I was down in the area of Basra, which is near the Kuwait border. And there was still fair amount of activity in that area, but mostly it was closer to the capital. But it was, and of course now things have kind of decompensated again, and it's kind of back to the way it was. But I did a lot of just kind of clinical type medicine there. I didn't see a lot of trauma. I didn't see any war battle trauma there. And I forgot the other part. Before I went to the maritime side with that other company, I was in Africa, and I saw a lot of malaria there and treated a lot of malaria. In addition to that, in Afghanistan, very third world, we don't see tuberculosis in the United States and Europe for that matter. I was seeing it weekly in Afghanistan. There's a lot of tuberculosis and just diseases that we normally don't have to deal with anymore. So, the third world gives you a lot of interesting opportunities to see diseases and treat diseases that you normally wouldn't see. So that I really value that experience as well, and malaria in Africa, and it's just still a big problem there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I notice as well, is that people have a very sanitized understanding of what the third world country is like. And I've been through some interesting places in my life, and it's one thing seeing that on TV. It's obviously completely different when you watch a movie where that is shot in that location. But what is very often, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the diseases, all that kind of stuff, which is, we don't really think about that anymore. Malaria, well, who gets that? Like you said, TBC, who gets that over here? Nobody cares. But some of that stuff is quite nasty.
I think we need smell-o-vision sometimes. I think those sanitized images that we see on BBC and CNN and what have you, it just doesn't convey and the squalor that you see there, and the smells particularly. We had to go to the hospital in Basra to get blood drawn, and I was legitimately worried that I wasn't going to be stuck with a clean needle. I was, but the hospital looked like a war zone. There was still a lot of cleaning up going on. Basra, I saw piles of rubble from buildings. It was much like the pictures that I saw that you see of World War II in Europe after the war. All the buildings, just piles of rubble, and that's exactly what it looked like. The hospital was not a place I would have chosen to take anyone if I had to. It was just not what we're used to in the first world, and where we live. And until you see that, I don't think you can really appreciate how good we have it. I completely agree with you on that one. And on all fronts, one of the things I've often talked and written about is obviously violence and what's been going on for the last couple of years. How people do law enforcement, and it's always a little bit funny to me when I see people get all upset about, well, this is a police state and fascist police and this and that. And my response is like, you really need to go to one of the third world countries where there actually is kind of like a fascist police that is extremely brutal, where society doesn't really function. And if you think that our law enforcement officers are misbehaving, you have no idea what that really is like. You are so correct. It's just I get a little angry when I hear that talk, because I work with police very closely on a regular basis, and these are people these are good men and women just trying to do an impossible job, and the minute they appear to be out of line, we often don't see the events leading up to the videos that we see on Facebook and YouTube, and we don't see the assaults that happened to them that led to the beatdown that the perpetrator got, because you don't attack the police. You just don't do it.
Yeah. And the same applies to medicine. I mean, I remember being in Indonesia a few years ago and visiting a local market, and we had the local shaman or magician wizard. I don't know what I have to call him, but he was sitting there with a snake half in and out of the box, and he was talking into a microphone with a small amplifier non-stop, and people were just giving him money and just dropping bills like he was a stripper, and just constantly. And he had these weird pictures of what I know is a work of art, and it kind of looks like half woman, half cow, with a couple little babies, half human, half cow. And there was a bunch of the pictures that you see in those tabloid magazines where it says Elvis is a space alien and he's alive, and they show you these weird half animal, half alien creatures. It was from one of those pictures, and that guy was looking like he was doing a pretty good business there, getting people all healthy, so to speak, to get rid of all the magic that was out there. So over here, people have no idea this stuff still exists, and it's like, okay, this is the medicine guy. You're sick.
True.
Somebody cursed you. You need to. And I talked to some of the locals, and people have no clue in the West what is actually still called medicine in many of those countries.
I saw a lot of really 19th century kind of approach to medicine in Afghanistan, and there was one unfortunate man, and I felt so bad for him because we would hire locals to work on the base, to work a lot of the labor jobs, and it was really good money for them, and it was a great opportunity for them. And we even in the food service, we had people, but they were not allowed to work, in the kitchen. They weren't allowed to handle and touch food. But nevertheless, we had to clear them medically, and part of that was, tuberculosis and hate to say it, but fecal parasites and HIV and everything else had to be examined for that and tested for it. And this poor guy was HIV positive, and so that eliminated him from any consideration to work with us. And I had to be the one to tell him, I'm sorry, we can't use you, and you have HIV, and you should probably try to see someone about that. And over there, treatment is, just not available. The drugs to treat HIV are extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. And so he was very disappointed, and I felt awful having to give him that news. Well, he came back a month later maybe, and said that he had gone to Pakistan and gotten, quote unquote, the cure for HIV. And I had to once again be the one to tell him there is no cure, and I hope you didn't spend too much money on it, because it's just not. And I wish I had said something. I had no idea that there were people, charlatans offering a cure for HIV. Had I known that, I would have made sure to tell him that. I told later people that, but it was just, I was not anticipating that. And then I had to tell him, I'm sorry, but this isn't, nothing's changed. You did not get cured, and there's no point in even testing you, because you still have it, and you'll have it until the day you die. So it was very sad, and I felt bad for this poor guy, and I hope that he didn't get taken for too much money, but it's just,
that kind of stuff is rampant in third world countries. It's extremely common to have these kinds of quacks that are just making a lot of money with people who still believe in a lot of stuff that is like superstition, magic. It's still very much alive. 2018, it's still very much a part of many societies. And again, it's like, this, you've traveled, you've seen it, I've seen it, other people we know seen it, and we know that this exists. But when I talk to a lot of people who have not had first-hand contact with those cultures locally, then they just don't believe you. They're like, what are you talking about? Obviously, this is nonsense. I'm like, no, you're thinking like a Westerner who's gone to school here and who lives in a modern society, and that is not the case in large parts of the world. But
they would prefer to believe in the magical thinking, and because it's easy, it gives them some hope, that magical thinking even exists in our world. We see it all the time, but it manifests in different sort of ways.
Yeah. Well, let's bring it back to some more concrete stuff, and I'd like to open up the first real topic when it comes to giving some sound advice. I've had my first aid training. I know a bunch of trainers and coaches have done the same thing, but a lot of people really still, don't necessarily have good information when it comes to treating typical training injuries when you are at a dojo, training martial arts or self-defense or whatever, the typical stuff that we have. And what I'd like to do, Doug, is just run you through a quick list of some of the most common things that we encounter and what is best practices this day and age. For instance, bloody nose. Somebody gets whacked in the face, his nose is bleeding, it's just gushing. What do you do?
Yeah, on a more practical matter, that's where the average person can really do a lot to help someone out. You don't have to have an advanced training in first aid. It doesn't hurt to have it, but you don't need it. Like at a competition or even just a street fight, if somebody gets a broken nose, you probably don't want to squeeze the nose to pinch the nose, because that's going to elicit a painful response and you may get hit. Broken nose is pretty painful, but in the case of a really bad bloody nose, up above and between the eyes on each side of the bridge of the nose are two arteries, or conversely, or both. You can actually use both pressure points. You can squeeze on both sides of the bridge of the nose, or press your finger against the upper lip and kind of up towards the dividing line there between the nares, the nostrils. Those are two pressure points, and I've actually used both of those at the same time, and that cuts off the flow of blood and can stop a lot of bleeding. Now, if there's some posterior bleeding or bleeding way back inside the nose, that may or may not be useful to stop bleeding. But what we can't see by looking at a nose, unless it's pretty obviously deformed, if it's broken or not. And by broken, I mean the bones of the nose, the latter portion of the protruding part of the nose is mostly cartilage.
Yeah.
So that's not really a bone that gets broken, but the bones further up, you can feel them as you're feeling your nose. Those bones are commonly broken if you get good connection.
Yeah.
And with a fist, and that needs to be evaluated. If you've got an obvious deformity and you're having trouble controlling the bleeding, you can also kind of put some ice packs in those areas that I just talked about too, and that kind of helps slow down the bleeding a little bit. But you never want to put bare ice on bare skin. You want to wrap the ice in like a washcloth, and you can put that on the skin. But 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off is the usual recommendation, so you don't freeze the skin either.
Yeah.
But that needs to be evaluated at an emergency department. They need to X-ray, or even perhaps if there's a loss of consciousness, that person should be done fighting for the day until they get medical clearance, because concussions are. We've been learning a lot more about concussions and how they can lead to more serious head injuries, and cumulative recurring concussions cause a lot of long-term brain damage. Look at Muhammad Ali, for example.
Yeah.
That's a classic example, and now we're seeing some residual long-term effects in the NFL, even with the helmets that they have. Those guys have repeated head contact over many years, and we've had some pretty noteworthy behavioral changes in some of the NFL players. People laugh at, we never used to wear helmets when we rode our bikes. Well, we didn't know anything. We didn't know any better then. So you can laugh at that all you want, but put a helmet on your kid. And it's going to help in their long-term health and their long-term mental health, particularly. Kids fall off their bikes. It happens. I did it all the time. I remember sliding around on an ice pond when I was a kid and fell and whacked my head and got knocked out,
Yeah.
Didn't see a doctor for it. He's fine. He's awake now.
Yeah.
But we know better now. We know better that needs to be evaluated.
That's true. And then last time I had my nose broken was a long time ago, but I was doing my teacher's exam in the Kung Fu style that I was practicing, and That was a test that took about 5-6 hours, nonstop. And the last
Wow.
Part of that was sparring, full contact sparring. Put the gloves on and then just go at each other. And my training partner kicked me in the face, and instead of the kick was coming up on my right side, and instead of dodging left like I would normally have done, I dodged right into it, and he just whacked me in the face, and my nose formed the letter Z apparently. So
nice.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
So my teacher, being who he was, old school all the way, and he said, lie down, bite on this, puts a stick in my mouth. Okay,
yeah.
Whack, and he just puts it back into position.
Rub some dirt on it and walk it off.
Yeah, kind of like that. So there was hardly any blood. That's one of the things that's why I mentioned it, is that people think, oh, broken nose, gushing blood. Not necessarily.
Not
First
always,
time
no.
my nose was broken, there was just a little trickle. And I kept on dancing with the girl that I asked to dance afterwards.
I'm sure that's a story in itself.
Yeah, one day I'll talk about
it. Yeah, another time.
Yeah. So, okay, moving on. So, a typical somebody gets punched or kicked in the face around the eye, and typically what results in a black eye, so the swelling. As soon as you see the swelling start, what should you do?
Stop fighting, and again, ice, and The orbit of the eye, that's what they call the eye socket. The orbit of the eye is pretty fragile. The bony prominences around it are pretty strong, but you can get transference of force, and the orbit can fracture. And you'll often see something called trapping if there's an orbital fracture, because what happens is that the muscles get caught in the fractured areas, and so the eyes don't track bilaterally. You get one that maybe is looking one way and the other eye is moving. That's a pretty clear sign of an orbital fracture, but even so, that should be evaluated. They can do that pretty simply with an X-ray. You really don't want that to happen. Now, there's something that's even a little more serious, and they're called Lafort fractures. It's a facial fracture, and that is kind of the most serious is the Lafort 4, and you've got basically the center of your face is not attached to the rest of your skull. Generally speaking, you've got some very serious head injuries associated with that, brain injuries, but they won't be awake. But a Lafort, that can be a Lafort 1, an orbital fracture. That can be a Lafort 1 fracture where that side of the face is fractured. And I wish I could show you visually. I've got a great anatomy app on my iPad, but I can't show you that here. Where you can, there's some suture lines on the skull that delineate that area where Lafort fractures take place.
I just found one. I'll put the Wikipedia page in the show notes.
Great, yeah, so, great idea. Those can be very serious injuries, and again, those need to be evaluated. We just are much more careful with head injuries now than we ever were in the past. And my background is in Taekwondo, and we always wore headgear, and it was no contact, and so nobody ever got hurt. I think it's good for people to get hit in the face a couple of times so that they know that it can hurt, but doesn't always have to hurt, or just getting hit doesn't have to hurt. I walked into a kick of a guy my size and broke a couple of ribs, and that hurt, but I lived. I didn't die from it. So I think it's good to understand that the human body can take a little bit of punishment sometimes, but head injuries, we don't like to mess around with those. Yeah. We like to make sure that there's no bleeding going on in the head. Many times bleeding can occur over a longer period of time, over several hours, and so you won't initially see any internal bleeding into the head. There's all kinds of YouTube videos where you can see the results of that, where they go in and have to evacuate the blood. It's called a subdural hematoma, or even a subarachnoid hematoma, but they put pressure on the brain. The worst case scenario of these is that you go in and you get a CAT scan or an X-ray, or mainly CAT scan and MRI, and there's no bleeding. Well, subdural hematomas are venous, and so it's a slow process. I'm just going to ignore my phone there.
Oh, it's okay.
It's a slower process.
Word, nine,
Oh my gosh.
word,
Silence that. I have a new phone and I haven't discovered all its.
Don't worry about it.
Anyway,
I have a feeling. Go ahead.
So it's a slow process and it can bleed very slowly. But what you get is you can be so severe that the brain can shift, and you get a shift across the midline, and you get some very serious neurological deficits, and it can kill you eventually. I would suggest going to YouTube and looking up subdural hematomas, and you can see what I'm talking about. There's some great videos that I've seen there, but so what they generally do, if you go in and you have negative findings, they still give you head injury precautions and things to look for. And they used to say, well, don't let them sleep. Well, no, that's wrong. You can let people sleep. But, the head injury precautions will tell you if there's problems. And generally it's, we call it changes in mentation. Their normal mental status is different, and those are when you need to go back to the hospital, because you can often have the subdural hematomas that happen hours after the incident. Yeah. So,
okay,
always good to get a baseline,
even
if nothing is wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Let's move on along the list a little bit. So another one, sprained ankle. Happens a lot. People they're sparring kicking and they just flip over an ankle because they didn't put it right, or the mats aren't positioned properly, and you get stuck between two mats and you sprain an ankle. What do you do?
Get them off their feet. Obviously, you can make a splint out of just about anything. You can take a folded up newspaper. What you want to make is something that's kind of U-shaped, and then wrap it even with a belt if you have nothing else. If you're in a martial arts competition, there's plenty of belts around, and then kind of secure that it's like a U shape that goes around underneath the foot and around the ankle and up the leg, and that will help immobilize that. Assist them to a vehicle. Don't always necessarily have to call an ambulance for those, but if there's, we use the term angulation. If there's some severe angulation. At worst, it's a dislocation. At best, it's a dislocation, I should say, and at worst, it's a fracture, or both. And I would probably get EMS involved, because the person will need pain management, and it's best to do that before you move them too far. You certainly don't want to try to carry them to a car with a badly fractured ankle. They're not going to have a happy time, and.
Yeah.
But we can do a lot of pain management medications, and then we've got some really good splinting materials. But you can improvise a splint with a magazine like that. Like I said, a folded up newspaper, or make it into like a U shape that covers the ankle with the leg. A pillow. Pillow works great for that. If you do it at home, you've got a pillow. You can secure that around the ankle as well with a belt, or even if you have some kind of big wide medical tape. Most people don't have that, but I'm weird. I have all kinds of stuff like that around the house. Go figure, right? And the pillow makes it, and plus it pads the injury, so that makes it a little easier to transport. Anything that's going to wrap around and secure that. Check for. This is kind of hard to explain. We have a policy of checking for pulses, sensation, movement, both before and after splinting, and that's a good thing to do, because you can that ascertains whether there's nerve damage, circulation damage. Finding a pulse on a foot is tricky. You look for it at the top of the foot, on the top of the arch, and you can kind of. It's hard to describe it really, but you can feel it, and if you find it, then I mark it with an X with a pen, and then the hospital knows where to go when you get there. There's a pulse there, and they can feel for a pulse, and you want to check it after you splint too, because you may have to do some manipulation, and that could interfere with circulation. Always check for sensation. just rub your fingers lightly along the foot, the bottom of the foot, and the side of the foot, and the top. That's a good way to determine that your nerves are intact.
Yeah.
So just basically split it as best you can, or if you at a competition, there's probably medical staff there that will do that for you. Frequently there is. Depends on how organized it might be, shall we say. If it's an unorganized event, there may not be, but it's easy to split something like that. Arms, you can do an arm the same way, like with a magazine, wrap a magazine around the forearm. There's shoulder dislocations are relatively common. I would think in like a judo competition that can happen. We use something in the ambulance, and you can buy these things. They're like for pennies. It's called a triangular bandage. And again, I would encourage you to go to say Google immobilize a dislocated shoulder, and it will show you how to apply that triangular bandage. And then secure it to the body, and that basically splints the shoulder so that it doesn't move. They're very painful. Yes, it's going to hurt. If it's so bad that there's angulation or even a fractured clavicle, and you'll see some shortening. That clavicle will be shorter than the other side. You might want to again get EMS involved for pain management, because those are extremely painful. And we do. I don't know about Europe. I think it just depends on where in Europe. In a lot of ways, the EMS system in Europe has been more advanced than ours, and in other ways not. But sometimes there'll be doctors on the ambulance. We almost never do that here, but the paramedics are well trained and know how to administer pain medications and splinting. Splinting is one of the early things that we were taught back in the days when we first started getting training for ambulance attendants, as they called them then. So splinting of orthopedic injuries has been a staple of ours for a long time. But it's very easy to do these things, and anyone can learn it. If you're interested and just want to know, I would strongly advise you just to take a first aid course, or even an advanced first aid course. You can do a lot before EMS gets there, and that can definitely positively affect the outcome.
Yeah, no, it's always a good idea to do a first aid course. I can very much recommend it to everybody, because some of the stuff you said is that I noticed is that it's been a while since I did my last course. So and it gets updated all the time. Even if you did it like 5-6 years ago, your first aid course, it can be that already procedures have changed, material has changed, and so on. So it's not really something that is static. Medicine is always evolving. First care and first aid is always evolving. So I would everybody who's listening to this, if you are interested in doing first aid, go for it. If you've done it and it's been a while, maybe get a refresher course, because it's more than likely that you'll learn something new again. Hey Doug, before we go on, the microphone is picking up a lot of background noise, like you're doing some paperwork or stuff. So I'm getting some screeches. I don't know if that's the case or if it's something else. I think your mic is really sensitive, so which is good. Which is good because then we get really quality sound.
Is that better?
That is awesome. That's much better.
Okay, I turned off the noise reduction. I think that might have been part of the problem.
That could be it. Yeah.
It might be that the battery is going low, and so you're getting some strange noise.
Oh, okay.
So I'll turn that off.
No worries. Well, let's move on to the more spectacular ones, and the final two that I want to mention. So, somebody gets choked out. Typical injury that happens in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or wrestling or any type of other grappling type art. So what do? You notice that your partner's out. Obviously, you let go right away. But how do you handle that?
That can be quite serious. It depends. You can actually fracture a larynx. Now, typically, those choke outs is due to a carotid choke, and so the carotid arteries have been shut off to the brain, and out go the lights. Once that pressure is released, generally the flow is returned and they wake up. The police used to be trained to do choke holds, and that was, we don't do that anymore because The other bad part of that is that if there are plaques, and it's generally in older people, but not always, if there are plaques of fat or cholesterol in the arteries, those can be dislodged, and when they get dislodged, they go straight to the brain, and then they can cause basically a stroke. But what you want to make sure that when that person wakes up is, are they aware of person, place, and time? Do they know who they are? Do they know where they are? And, do they know what's going on? Where are you at right now? What were you doing? Make sure that their mentation comes back pretty soundly. It might take a few minutes. They've had an anoxic event, basically a lack of oxygen to their brain, and it could take a little while. I strongly encourage anyone to get medically evaluated anytime that happens, because we don't know what damage to the structures. You can actually tear arteries and vessels with moves like that, and then you've got bleeding into the neck, or you can cause a stroke. Even just in a matter of a few minutes, you can have a stroke happen in the brain. The brain is a remarkably resilient organ, and yet it's easily damaged as well. So I recommend anytime there's any kind of cerebral event, they're done fighting, and they need to get medically cleared by a neurologist, period.
Okay.
I was working at a horse park, an equestrian park here in the area, and particularly with the kids, anytime there was a loss of consciousness, that they were done, and they had to get cleared by an independent neurologist before they could come back and compete again. And I firmly believe in that in any kind of sport where that has to happen.
I guess that kind of answers my next question, which is the same one, but unconsciousness due to impact, like punch, kick, or somebody getting slammed to the ground.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's
same
the same
story
answer.
there.
Yeah.
There's an injury called coup counter coup, where you get struck on the head, and there's that initial impact on the brain. Now the brain is a big squishy organ inside of a bag of water inside the skull, which is surrounded by another layer of water. So imagine a water balloon with squishy oatmeal in it or something inside of a water-filled compartment, and it literally gets bounced around from one side of the skull to the other, and you can get bruising of the brain, and you can also have there's arteries that feed into the brain all around the skull, and those can tear with that movement back and forth, and it depends on the injury, it depends on any physical defects that person may have or may not have. But you can get tears, particularly the meningeal artery, that can be a bad one. They get bleeding very quickly into the head. The bruising that we typically associate with a concussion, where there's a loss of consciousness, not necessarily any bleeding, but there can be some bruising, and that's typically associated with a concussion. We consider any loss of consciousness to be a concussion. And that needs to be evaluated as well, primarily just to get a baseline of where they are now and where they may end up, in a few days from now. So again, they need to get evaluated. We're just being so careful with brains these days that it just doesn't pay to not get that looked at. And we have so many wonderful diagnostic tools now to do that. MRIs and CAT scans. MRIs is an amazing thing. They can look at structures in 3 dimensions. It's just awesome. Yeah. So,
and I think one thing that I'd like to add to that is that the severity of the punch doesn't mean anything. And
that's right.
I'll quickly tell 2 stories. One of my students who competed for the first time, and he actually fought, his first opponent was the guy who'd won that tournament like 5-6 times. So he's really good. My student's first fight. And he did okay, but then he got hit in the head. He was a little bit dizzy, but he was still in the fight, and then gets this big punch, if I recall correctly. And on the way down, as he's falling, that guy just kicks him like Muay Thai style as hard as he can in the neck. And my student was out. He was completely out of it. He had a severe concussion, and he basically spent a long time just sitting in a room in the dark, not watching TV, not doing anything, because that was the only thing that, he could do to wait for his brain to recover.
Yeah,
That was
that's very true.
When I saw him go down, I'm like, crap, okay, this is bad. I knew it right away. But that's one extreme. You see somebody taking a huge shot and they fall down and they're out. However, I had this, I think it's almost 20 years ago, I had a student, he was like, I don't know, 13, 14, very small, very wiry guy, didn't weigh much. I mean, so a young teenager basically, and we were sparring, and he was a little bit ambitious, and he tried to really get to me, and obviously I didn't do much back because I outweighed him significantly, but at one point, to show him like, okay, you need to stop just, rushing forward with your face forward, because that's not going to help. So I threw a jab.
Leading with the face is never a good idea.
Exactly. It's a bad strategy. So I threw a jab, and the thing is that I didn't throw it fast or anything, but that didn't matter. My jab had stopped moving before he made contact. So I stopped the punch. I wasn't even advancing anything. I extended my arm and kept it there. And he ran into my fist with his face. That was with the tip of his chin. And he went down like a sack of potatoes. He just dropped and he was out. And I tried to revive him, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to kick your ass." Okay, that's good.
It's funny but frightening at the same time when it's your student and all you did was put your hand out.
Exactly.
And because, the force of that was magnified by his momentum, obviously, into your fist, even though it had stopped. I know what a solid piece of meat you are. I mean, you're a big guy, and you're very solid. And a slight little teenager running into that, I can only imagine what that felt like.
And that's the thing. I mean, that one. He was just running into a solid object basically, but the punch was not moving. So that was the funny part about it. But on the other hand, he had a concussion. He turned out to have a concussion.
Absolutely, he did. I can tell you that right now, without even having been there. That's definitely a concussion event.
Yeah.
Do you remember? This was in the 80s. I don't remember how old you might have been. I was in paramedic school, and it was the Ray Mancini Duke Koo Kim fight. And I was watching it live. And Mancini just connected with him. And the Korean fighter went down like a tree, and he was actually having a seizure on his way down. He landed a punch so hard, and it didn't really look like any. But boxers are trained, and they know how to deliver energy, and he just connected hard with him, and down he went. And the Korean fighter died as a result of the brain injury that he had. It was massive bleeding into his skull, and it kind of freaked out Mancini. He wanted to quit fighting, and he changed his mind later, but I don't think he continued fighting much long after that. Anyway. I was the first and only death I've seen in the ring, and I'm sitting there in paramedic school at a fire station doing a clinical, and we're all watching this, going, "Oh my God, this guy's going to die," and he did.
Yeah.
But he was seizing on his way down to the mat, and it was really awful to watch. And so it can happen, and it doesn't have to be a hard punch, as like you said, you just put your hand out there and he ran into it.
Yeah.
And it just we're all made the same, but there's variations, and we don't know where we have a weak artery in our brain, or maybe extra space in our skull. Kids typically have a lot more space than adults, so they'll bleed for longer before they start noticing things, because it takes a little longer for that space to be taken up by the bleed. So, it's just that's why we're so careful with kids, especially with losses of consciousness and concussions.
It's dangerous.
It's a devastating injury to have.
I still think that to this day, there's still too many people who don't take it serious, especially martial artists, combat sports practitioners, MMA, Muay Thai. It's like, it's a badge of honor. Like, I got knocked out.
Right.
I got knocked down. I got right back up again. I'm fine. I'm great. And we know nowadays that, and I know that there's no freebies. You don't get to go unconscious for free. There's always, some damage. There's always a risk involved, and even if the variables are the same, you might be able to take one punch, but you might not take another. And again, quick story time from my end. One of my students and I, we were sparring hard, and because he's been training with me for a long time, I outweigh him by at least 40 pounds. Maybe more now, but back then it was about 40, I think. And I threw a left hook really, really well, one of my good, better techniques back then. And he tried to duck, but he was too late. So I hit him full power in the forehead. And,
Wow.
and he budged and then just looked at me. I mean, his head moved a little bit and he looked at me. And I'm like, are you okay? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm good. But I just broke my fist. And I was wearing 12-ounce gloves.
Wow.
So I went home with a broken knuckle, and he didn't feel anything. I said, are you sure? Because I hit you really hard. So no, I'm fine. So he just probably took it perfectly for that specific punch, for that specific angle, and so on. And he was fine. And I was messed up. And then another time I was training with somebody who wanted to compete, and we were sparring, and we were in clinch range. We were in the pocket basically, and I threw a left hook again, same left hook, and I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel any contact, and he just dropped in front of me on the floor, and flash knockdown, got back up and said, "Holy crap, what was that?" I was like, "I don't know."
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
that's a great example of how one incident can be really bad, and the other one can, what was that? That was nothing.
Yeah.
It's just, you just can never tell. And I'll just share one more story, because this is a memorable head injury I had from a bar fight in Denver one night. Very slightly built young man got hit with one of those really thin beer glasses.
Yeah.
They're very thin. They break easily. I didn't think that much of it. He had a laceration to his skull, and it was over the temporal region, which is a pretty hard part of the skull. It's a little bit thicker there. And so he had a nice little laceration, needed to be sutured. He was awake, alert, and conscious, and there was no loss of consciousness. Got him to the hospital. He had a depressed skull fracture.
Damn.
From a broken glass type of incident that hit his head and broke, and a laceration, but underneath that was a depressed skull fracture. So we just can't tell by looking at it.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the main reasons why, as you said, it's so important, especially when there's a loss of consciousness, just get it checked out, because you can't tell, you never know. You might not feel anything, and you're actually walking around with a serious injury.
That's right.
Or it might be nothing, like in the case of that one student of mine. We did harm to each other many times afterwards. I once ripped off his clavicle by accident. So,
I'd rather go to the hospital and walk out knowing nothing was wrong than
exactly
having to wonder over the next several hours, am I going to wake up dead? Just go in and get it looked at.
Yeah.
Just do it. Just get it over with, and then you'll know.
Okay. I'm just checking time here. We're closing in on the 1 hour mark, so we still got a bunch of stuff to go through. So I'd like to move on to the next topic, and I just want to get your take on a couple of examples, typical things that you can do when it comes to violence, what people like to call street fights, or you're in a self-defense encounter, you fought, somebody else fought, whatever, you want to help somebody, you need to help yourself. Your friend was in a fight and he's lying there. So some basic scenarios. So somebody gets knocked out, he's unconscious on the floor. And what we typically see is like that rigid knockout is somebody gets punched in the face, they go rigid, they fall like a plank. And one of the key problems with that is the whiplash effect that accelerates the back of their skull into the pavement. So if you see somebody go down like that, what do? What's the safest option?
Well, and of course, the famous answer that we all have is it depends. We all know that one, but it's, street fights can get very chaotic and very dangerous, and we're starting to see so much mob mentality that comes out of all that stuff. Your first responsibility is your own safety. I don't care if this is your best friend. I don't care who it is. If you think you're in danger, you need to get to a safe area. That person who's down is down, and they're probably not, unless of course they start, dogpiling, and that's a different situation. But It's so hard to say what would you do because it really does depend. But most of the time, when someone gets knocked out, the fight's over. The perpetrator's happy, off he goes. Now you've got a friend who's on the ground and maybe conscious, maybe half conscious, may come up swinging because he thinks he's still fighting. But the best thing you can do is to try to keep him calm while keeping yourself calm. Try to keep him from moving. We have gotten away from spinal immobilization a great deal for a lot of things that we typically used to do it, but because the backboards they cause more harm than good. But in a situation like that, I think there's still some indication for keeping his or her neck from being moved and holding their head. They may not like that very much. They may be half conscious and then they feel someone's hands on their head. You may have some issues, but just try to talk to them as calmly as you can. Hey, this is your friend. It's me. I don't want you to move. You've been knocked out. Try to explain to them. There's a phenomenon called perseverance with head injury. Sometimes you'll get the same question repeatedly. Just keep answering it over and over and be patient because they're forgetting what you told them 5 seconds ago. In many cases, it's just exactly. They're stuck in that loop, and just keep answering. Make sure you get EMS on the way, and cops will probably be there pretty soon anyway. And there's usually someone in this day and age of cell phones that someone calls the police.
And that's one of the things that I also think. It's great that you mentioned that. Is that when you go to help somebody, they are perhaps in a state of shock, or they maybe have no idea what just happened, short-term memory loss, and so on. A while ago, I saw a guy on a bike go down really bad because a car cut him off, and I stopped and I went to help him, and I immediately saw that he had. It looked to me like he had a broken clavicle or broken arm the way he was holding it. But I tried to talk to him and I said, look, stay down, don't move. He was conscious, but he was very much in shock. I said, don't move. I'll call an ambulance. And he says, I need to call my wife, but he couldn't get to his phone because he had one functioning arm.
Right.
I said, no, let me call your wife. Just stay here and. Just talk, and it turned out he was a doctor actually. And,
no kidding.
Yeah, and he was very much in shock. So I'm sure he knew. He would have known if it was somebody else, like this is what you need to do, and so on. But when it was his turn, like many people, once you're in shock or once the pain hits, or your body just reacts in a very different manner than you think.
There was probably a head injury component going on there too. He probably got concussed a little bit, and so. No matter how much he tried to explain things, it wasn't really registering with him, or just the adrenaline aspect of it. And I like to clarify what I don't like to use the word in shock. Shock implies something metabolic that's going on. There's a lack of perfusion of blood and oxygen to tissues. People use that word, well, he was in shock. Well, that's not really shock. We'll talk about that just a tiny little bit. But emotions, adrenaline, head injury can all contribute to that, not really knowing what's going on. There's again, it's like another loop that they're stuck in. So, but people will probably still refer to it as being in shock. Okay, that's fine, but that's not really what shock is. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
No, you're right. It's you're right. It's not the right. The nomenclature is specific when we're talking about medical things. So,
it's an emotional shock. There's no question about it. It's an emotional shock, and in that respect, I suppose that's still kind of correct. But but it's most people never go through something like that, and so they're a little bit scrambled, even if it's just emotionally due to the injury.
I'm talking about the psychological aspect of it, the stress reaction that they're getting, as opposed to what you say is just a typical the way that the body itself, the bodily functions react to the trauma, which is quite a different thing. No, great.
But it's still a valid condition. I mean, yeah, they're not hearing you, they're not understanding you. The perseverance of maybe a concussion is happening. I've seen that a lot as a paramedic. We just, if we have someone else in the back, like a policeman or something, I just kind of look up and smile, because it's just this looping conversation that you keep having with them, and you just have to just deal with it, and eventually they get past it. But initially, you're answering the same question an awful lot.
Yeah. Okay.
And it gets kind of annoying, but yet it's not their fault. You just kind of have to kind of go with it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the big one. What if somebody gets stabbed?
Oh boy.
Yeah. Lots of
don't take the knife out if it's protruding. You can do more damage by pulling that knife out than by leaving it there. Great example. I didn't have the call. I saw it come into the hospital one night. This guy actually stabbed himself with a great big kitchen knife in the chest, and he was alert and talking. They had to restrain him because he was trying to, when they walked in, he was trying to pull the knife out and do it again because he missed his heart. And by the grace of God, this man was not meant to die, because you could see the knife, the handle vibrating back and forth with the heartbeat. That knife blade was right up against his heart, but didn't penetrate his heart. But by pulling that knife out, he could have actually done some serious damage and died immediately. Or if anyone else had tried pulling that knife out. Leave it in place. It seems counterintuitive, but you've got to leave it there, and try to stabilize it with bulky dressings, or just don't let anybody touch it. Okay. I've seen a few of those. Typically, knife attacks or slashes, and those can result in some serious bleeding, and that leads into maybe the next subject that we were going to talk about is tourniquets. Tourniquets are back in vogue, and they're wonderful. We've had a couple of police officers whose lives have been saved by either another officer applying it, or they've self-applied it because they had a major vascular trauma and they were bleeding profusely. I think in one case it was arterial. Had that tourniquet not been applied, he would have died within seconds. I believe it was a femoral artery that was damaged, and it was, that's a big vein, a big artery. Yeah. Two police officers in Denver are alive to this day because of tourniquets, and I cannot stress enough, if you're in a profession where you're at risk for that sort of damage, or anyone around you, you should have one on your person. They're easy to carry. There's a flat pack made by, I can't remember the name of the company now, I just saw it. You can carry it on your belt, and it looks very inconspicuous, especially if a shirt is over your pants. And I only recommend two types of tourniquets, and you can buy them on Amazon. They are called the Soft-T, S-O-F-F-T, or the, of course, I can't remember the other one now, Soft-T, or the cat tourniquet, C-A-T. Combat applications tourniquet is what it's called. Be careful about knockoffs. There's some out there. If they're really cheap, they're probably a knockoff. You're going to pay about $20 or maybe a little bit more for those, but they will save a life if you need one. And those are the only two types of tourniquets that are really kind of utilized by EMS in this country, and maybe even in Europe. It's a similar type. There's an elastic band kind of thing. Don't waste your money on it as a tourniquet. Okay. It can be good to hold a bandage in place, especially because you can put a lot of pressure on it. Yeah. If you put a dressing on, that's what they're good for. But don't use it as a tourniquet, because it just doesn't apply the right kind of pressure in the right place to do that. So tourniquets are, you want to apply them above the wound, and when I say above, I mean closer to the heart, above the wound. We would use the medical term proximal, but just think of closer to the heart, above the wound. If you've got a forearm that's gashed open and it's bleeding profusely, then place that tourniquet above the elbow. That's closer to the heart. Then on the leg, you would want to go closer towards the groin. And then speaking of groin and, say, armpit injuries, not terribly practical to put a tourniquet over something like that, but what you can do There's a combat dressing, that's Israeli combat dressing. I carry a little personal first aid kit that has one of those, a chest seal, a chest vent needle, which you shouldn't do unless you're trained, and also one of those combat dressings. And what it does, it's got like a little built-in tourniquet. You place that over the wound, and then say if it's in the groin, you pull it around the leg up towards the hip, and you can really crank down on that, and it helps put pressure. It's more of a direct pressure type of thing, but you really can't put a tourniquet around that as well as you can, like on the lower down an extremity. On the case of it's an axilla, but meaning your armpit, if there's a big laceration damage there, you could put one of those on there, and then maybe put a belt up and around the opposite shoulder, and they're able to pull pressure that way. And you don't want to put a tourniquet around someone's neck, obviously, but you can do that on one side, like on one side of the neck. Great scene out of Band of Brothers where the medic is putting a tourniquet over someone, and they're using that sort of technique. It goes over the opposite shoulder, and then they can actually pull some pretty tight pressure on that. And you're going to probably end up having to keep your hand on it too as well. A serious bleeder like that generally requires a little more direct pressure, but not every serious bleed requires a tourniquet either. If it's arterial and oozing, many of the times you can put direct pressure on that, but tourniquet isn't going to hurt anything either. So don't be afraid to use one if you have one. Okay. Tourniquets are awesome.
Well, I just I'll put up a couple of links in the show notes for the Softy and the cat tourniquets.
Yes,
so
that's
that people
great.
can find them on Amazon. And like you said, expect to pay about $25, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but don't buy cheap crap, because
don't go cheap.
Yeah, lives are on the line, even including
That's
yours.
right.
So because there are incidents where people actually get stabbed or are bleeding, and that they're asking somebody to help them put on the tourniquet they have on themselves, so that it's not necessarily you applying a tourniquet to somebody else, but somebody might use your tourniquet to save you. So don't be cheap ass and buy good stuff. You don't have to buy 50,000, but it's worth it.
Is $20 worth your life? I think so. $20 or $30 even. But the other thing is that those tourniquets come in like a plastic shrink wrap. When you get it, take it off, because you'll never get that off when your fingers are bloody and wet.
Yeah.
So take that off and have it in like a flat pack on your belt or in a pocket or something where you can get at it easily. You may be disabled, one arm may not be working, so make sure you could get at it without having to dive into the opposite pocket. Say you could get it in your back pocket, but the belt pack is great, and you can reach that either with either arm, on one side or the other, or even if it's on the back of your pants, on the back of your belt. I highly recommend those flat packs. That's what all the cops are using, and they keep them on their tactical vests most of the time. And that's just anyone can get to it. Even if it's you can't get to it, someone else can do it. So find a class. There's classes that teach you how to apply those and some of the concepts, and they have to be really tight. But there's plenty of classes around. The agency, Denver Health, teaches civilians how to do that, and I highly recommend that course too. There's all, and if you know where an ambulance station is, go there and ask them how to do it. They'll happily tell you how to do it. They'll happily talk you through it.
Okay. Well, and I've got one more on this topic here of the aftermath of violence in the streets or self-defense. So let's say we could just cover stabbing, knockouts, and so on, tourniquets. Let's say all that is done, or you don't know what to do or whatever, but for whatever reason, time goes by and the paramedics arrive. Now, what can we do as civilians then to make their job easier to do, or especially what shouldn't people do? Taking into account, obviously, that many people, that's the first time they encounter this kind of situation. They may be emotional, panicking, not quite sure what to do. So as a paramedic, you arrive on the scene. What's the best way we can help you out?
Tell the story as succinctly and as you can. Tell them what happened. Don't get into all the drama, but just say he was stabbed. He got knocked out and hit the back of his head, and he's been unconscious since then, or he's just now starting to wake up. If you can give him a time frame, that's great. If not, don't worry about it. Ask if they need your help. Quite often they'll say, no, we've got it, but thank you. Sometimes they can be a little brusque because there's not a lot of time to waste. Don't take it personally. They're just in a hurry. So, but ask them if there's anything you can do. I've utilized civilians many times to assist when we don't have any help yet. And, most of the time people are extremely happy to help, especially if it is a friend of theirs. They want to help. But if they ask you to step out of the way, please do so. They've got work to do, and they don't have much time to do it. And you trying to inflict your help on them may be getting in their way, and you're not helping your friend or loved one by doing that. So, but ask. If they say, no thanks, we've got it, then step out of the way. And maybe try to help with crowd control. Try to keep the crowd away. It gets a little oppressive sometimes when you're a paramedic and you've got people pressing in on you, and adds a little pressure that we don't need sometimes. So you can help with crowd control. Hey, let's give these guys some room to work. Let's move everybody back. Most people are pretty cooperative about that, and that's extremely helpful to us as well.
Okay. Excellent. That's great advice. And now I'm going to breach maybe your favorite topic, and I call it busting myths. What are some of the things? I mean, I often talk about violence, how movies and TV get it wrong, but what's some of the stuff you see in the movies or on TV shows that are just complete nonsense when it comes to what paramedics do?
Everything.
Well, that covers it. That's
I can't watch medical dramas on TV. I just want to pull my hair out again. I don't have any left. But this is what I see. Let's get that bullet out. Let's pull that bullet out. That's going to fix everything. Well, no. Often it will create a space for bleeding to happen. So if you see a bullet don't pull it out. I actually did pop one out of the back of a guy's arm. It was just kind of in the fatty tissue. But don't go digging in the hole to try to get the bullet out. Please, God, no. That doesn't solve anything. It doesn't fix anything. Or don't try to stitch over a bullet wound. That doesn't fix anything either. There's just so... Nearly everything you see on TV and movies is just utter crap. The movie Shooter just about made me scream out loud when he made that homemade IV out of a bottle of water and salt and a hose and a ball needle inflator for a sports ball. I just no, God, no. Don't do that. We'll have the IVs when we arrive. That was one of the worst things I've ever seen on a movie. That improvised first aid crap that he was doing. It was just don't try to do a cricothyrotomy on someone with a hollow object, stick it in their neck so they can breathe. Just don't do any of that stuff. You're going to do more harm than good. We're trained to do things like that, and there's so many delicate structures in the neck that you can kill someone doing that. So
there's one of those Saw movies where this guy is in a trap, and his head is in some sort of box with glass or something, and he can't get out, and then the box starts flooding with water. So he takes his pen and he slams it into his throat and then just keeps breathing that way until they rescue him. And it's kind of I'm like, okay, give that a try, see how it works.
Thank you for playing. No. Oh my God. Oh, I'm glad I didn't see that.
Yeah, I just wanted to share with you, the good news.
That's wonderful. I'm going to have to watch that now and have something to laugh about. I have yet to see anything on TV or movies that was accurate in any way, shape, or form. So if you see it, just laugh and move on. Don't pretend that it's going to be something you can do. There's plenty of stuff on YouTube. Of course, you have to be careful with YouTube as well. There's some bad information out there, but generally, if it looks like a bad idea, it probably is. And anything that's going to cause more harm to your patient is probably not a good idea. If it shows you ways to stop bleeding without occluding airways, great. If it shows you how to put on a tourniquet and wear, that's great. But again, I would consult with a doctor or your local ambulance crew. If you just walk up and say, hey, can you guys talk to me about this? And they will be happy. We love to teach. We really do.
Yeah.
It makes our job easy when we show up and someone has done some appropriate first aid, and you may have saved that person's life before we can even get there, and you should be proud if you can do that, because and I'll be the first one to tell you, hey, great job, you saved his life.
No, I think that's let's just leave it at that. Everything you see in the movies is wrong, so forget about it. Don't even take it seriously.
Movies and TV are wrong. End of story. Don't do what they do.
Okay. Well, then I'd like to move on because we're approaching the 90-minute mark here, and that's usually where I try to wrap things up. I've got a couple of quick questions from people. I opened the floor. Hey, if you guys want to ask Doug something specific. So I'll shoot with the first one, which is from Wiebe Lindemann, who's one of my patrons, and he asks two questions. So the first one is it true that sometimes when you guys are working and there's something really horrific and a big incident that happens, that doesn't necessarily have the same psychological effect that you would expect, whereas a relatively small, minor incident suddenly causes maybe PTSD or some serious psychological issues?
Yes, it's very true. We're trained to handle blood and gore. We're trained to handle major medical stuff, a cardiac arrest. We're so comfortable and confident in that because of the incredible training that we get as paramedics. It's just, you can't even imagine. And I wish I could just empty my head and show you the things that they show us and how to handle that stuff. And we train and train and train until it's second nature. And that stuff generally doesn't bother us. I can tell you that everybody I know, I was just talking with one of my new coworkers yesterday about this, and that every one of us that has had a PTSD episode or something that has affected us, invariably it's involving a child. Invariably it's some kind of violence on a child, and many times, for an example, I had a strange trigger one day. I had two little boys that were murdered by their asshole father, and I don't even want to go into that, but I did an unhealthy thing with that episode and pushed it down so deep I forgot about it, because it was an awful scenario, and I had forgotten about it. And I remembered after the call, I was pretty much a wreck, and I cut all the kids' clothes off, and there was this little toy, ATV four-wheeler in his pocket. And I knew this little guy was dead. I mean, it was just not gonna be a good outcome. And I ended up keeping that little toy. I don't even know why. I just was holding on to it, and I stuck it in my pocket. And years later, I'm digging through some boxes, and I pulled this little thing out. And I'm like, what is this? Why do I have this? And it all came back, and like this whole scenario came back in like a microsecond, and I just sat there and kind of lost it again. That triggered that memory, that little item, and I realized that I hadn't really processed that in a very healthy way due to a lot of other things going on with me at the time. And I've allowed myself to remember that one, because it was one of those where, it was, I allowed myself to grieve for that kid because I didn't do it when I should have.
Yeah.
And it was an innocuous thing, even just another ambulance call that you go on. I could share war stories, and we'd take, hours to do that. I'm not going to keep doing that. I could tell you about a childbirth that triggered a memory, because it was the same woman who had lost her child years before, and I didn't know that until she told me. Yeah, and it triggered another emotional episode, But it was a good closure to that one, because she had a live baby after the one that died years ago. So that it's absolutely true. It's just we get triggered by some of the most innocuous things that trigger a memory from something horrible that we witnessed, and nearly all of them involve children.
Yeah.
It seems.
I mean, let's move on from that one because I don't want you to dig into that stuff too much. But
I don't either.
we answered the question, and it's true. So we had another question that I think is interesting because it's relevant to what I see happening in Europe and around the world. Is more and more paramedics get attacked when they show up to treat wounded from whatever kind of violence or injury that they face. How do you handle that kind of stuff, that urban madness, as he calls it?
Yeah, Australia's had a real bad problem with that, and I think many countries in Europe. We have developed policies in this country, and that has to kind of come from, like the powers that be. But we used to just run in where fools dared to tread before we'd go running in with the cops sometimes on crack house raids, and that's a stupid thing to do. You can't help anyone if you take a bullet. Our policies now are to wait for the police to clear us into the scene, and we generally stage a number of blocks away from something that, at least if we know there's violence happening, we're not allowed to go in. And that seems counterintuitive to the general public, but we can't go in there and help anyone if we're shot or stabbed or beaten. So that's become just a matter of policy here in this country now.
Yeah, I've seen it happen in Europe as well. Given all the terrorist attacks we've had the last few years, is that paramedics are kept at bay until the scene is secured, which can take quite a while nowadays.
It can.
The way that terrorists have changed the way they act. So. Okay. Next question is from Bonzi West, and he asks, we kind of covered that, but for serious injuries with heavy bleeding below the elbow or knee, should a tourniquet be applied just above the elbow-knee joint or at the shoulder-hip joint? So I think you covered that above the wound, right?
Yeah, above the wound, towards the heart.
Towards the heart.
Yeah.
All right.
Towards the heart. Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay. Then we can move on to Johnny Mendoza's question. And he says, maybe what sort of symptoms to look out for after somebody takes a hit to the head that you should be concerned about? So what kind of symptoms, when we see that, do we really have to be concerned about?
It can be as simple as a sudden headache that gets worse, continually worse, light sensitivity, sudden changes in their mental status. Those are the big early warning signs. Unequal pupil sizes, one side's bigger than the other. Get them into the doctor right away or to the hospital. Those are kind of early signs to look for. Unconsciousness is a later sign, and that's often not very good, but they still need to get into the hospital.
Okay. Well, and we kind of cover that too, in a sense that,
right,
like you said, any head trauma, especially when it causes unconsciousness, just don't take any chances. Just go in and have it checked out, and better safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
Okay, then we've got a final question, and it's an interesting one. It's from James Stan, and he asks, as a paramedic, would you advise, should someone ever find themselves in a possible confrontation, to go full on into the threat and risk killing them or damaging them permanently, or to try and remove yourself if possible as quickly and as efficiently as possible?
Yeah, if you're an EMS person and you're in a situation where you've got a violent patient, or someone that your safety matters more than theirs, than their medical condition, and that sounds rather cold, but it's true. We can't help them if he's killing us or has disabled us with some kind of a physical attack. So back yourself out of there and make sure you've got police coming. We all carry radios, so we can call for help and just get out of there. That does seem counterintuitive as well to the general public, but we're not trained to handle violent patients. To some degree we are, but we're not trained to take them down. And the police have that training. We do not. Get out of there and let them do their job so that you can go back in and then do your job.
Okay, good. That kind of wraps it up a little bit. I just want to do some, I don't know, do you have any final words, final advice for people when it comes to everything we covered, or anything you want to mention that we didn't cover?
Don't be afraid to try to help. You may feel like you're not doing much, but even just if someone is seriously ill or injured, having another person there, we all have that fear of dying alone. If they're dying and you're there to hold their hand, that could make a lot of difference in that person, even their outcome. They just know that there's someone there and that help is coming. So don't be afraid to jump in, even if all you're doing is holding their hand.
Excellent. And I think that's great advice. Now, before we move on, and that's something that I wanted to mention to people, one of your passions is photography, and you've got a great website.
Thank you.
So could you give the URL, because I don't know how to pronounce it. I would say bokeh, but
Bokeh. It's Bokeh. It's www.bokehimages, all one word, .com, Bokeh Images.
And I would advise the listeners, I mean, I'll put the link in the show notes, obviously, but take a look, and some of the stuff we talked about. We've got some pictures from Afghanistan and I think Iraq as well. But the ones I liked best were some of the pictures you took from when you were at sea as a paramedic. And really, really great pictures they're also for sale. And if I'm not mistaken, you also have merchandising, right?
I do. I have, there's like smartphone covers and mugs and T-shirts, and I think there's T-shirts. There's a lot of, you can when you click on the buy link on any of the photo, there's options to buy prints or merchandise, cell phone covers, things of that nature. So it's all there. You can have one of my pictures put on a cell phone cover, on a mug. There's the quality of the prints are phenomenal, and they're all guaranteed. So if you don't like what you see, you can send it back and get a total refund. And I'll put up a 50% off discount code that will be effective on that, just for people that hear this podcast.
All right. So I talked to Doug about this before we start recording. So if you go to his website, bokehimages.com, and I'll have the link in the show notes, direct link. So you type podcast 50. So that's all capitals, PODCAST, and then the number 50. And then you get a 50% discount on anything you buy there. So I just wanted to mention that because some of the stuff we talked about here, it's hard to get a feel for that. And pictures can say one thing, but oftentimes they're crap pictures. And yours are quite good, actually, to catch some of the, let's call it ambiance of the places you've been. So...
Well, thank you. I'm not a professional, but I'm a passionate amateur, and I just shoot what I feel and what brings out an emotional response in me. So if that is good, then I've done my job.
And also, Doug, I want to thank you a lot for taking the time for this interview. Appreciate it a lot. I think we covered a bunch of really quality information for the listeners. So I hope that they hopefully never need to use it. But if they do, maybe some of the stuff we discussed sticks in their head and they can actually help somebody. So that would be great.
I hope so. I hope they never need it too. But if they do, you can make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. Well, on that positive note, I'm going to wrap up this episode. So everybody, thanks for listening. And in particular, you, Doug, thanks for your time and sharing all your experience with us. If you guys want to see the show notes, you can go to wimsblog.com/22. So that's wimsblog.com/22. And there you will see all the show notes. I'll put up a bunch of links with the stuff Doug talked about and some of the products he mentioned that you might want to get. As always, you can join me on Patreon for a lot more content. And if you want to help out the podcast and just make it grow and so that we can reach more people, as always, like, share, and subscribe. Maybe leave a review on iTunes. And we can do a lot more of these episodes. So thank you very much, everybody. And I will talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.